So welcome to Leadership Within, the moment for leaders to reflect on their human experience of leadership. I'm your host, Vanessa, and I'm joined by TK.
Hello, yes.
How are you doing, TK?
It's an interesting time, and I think it's maybe topical to our episode, starting some new ventures, new ideas. Basically, pushing hard, maybe too hard. Having said that, this conversation is always a great opportunity for me to stop, to reflect, and to hopefully have a great conversation that our listeners enjoy. How about yourself, Vanessa?
Yeah, I was saying to you earlier, I'm having a really quiet start to the new year, which is maybe it feels slightly unusual. So I'm really trying to lean into the spaciousness it gives me, and not let my brain, take over with all the what ifs that can happen in the joy of self-employment.
Good luck. It's definitely something that I think, myself and possibly many of our listeners, if they're solo entrepreneur leaders of the universe, might struggle with too. But something worth exploring, definitely. So what is it that you bring in today, Vanessa?
Yeah, so the topic that I was really curious about was really a question, which was, how do you know that you're right as a leader? And it kind of came from that, kind of sometimes leadership can feel really lonely. It can feel like, I'm carving this path and, a part of me feels, is full of innovation and ideas. And yes, this is the way to go. And, and then we can come up with those moments of doubt and like, ooh, how do I actually know I'm right? And it just made me really think about, I've been, I think I may have said to you before, I'm in this business development program, which is trauma informed. And one of the things that they keep kind of highlighting when people show up and they're questioning things, they keep saying, don't follow the emotion, follow the data. And it's just I'm laughing because it's obviously an edge for me. It's like, oh my God, it's so much easier to follow the emotion. So it just got me wondering about, how do you really know you're right? And I suppose, if I was to give you an example, I remember back, so I just turned 50 and I'd gone back into employment for a period of time. And I think I managed 14 months and I was just deeply frustrated. And I decided at that point, right, okay, I'm not built for employment. I'm too maverick. Let's just, step back into self-employment and restart your coaching business. So that's what I did. And then shortly after that, various circumstances happened and I found myself then separating, getting divorced and all these different things. And so suddenly it was like, oh my God, did I do the right thing? And so I'm just, I can have those moments where I think, oh God, this is really scary. And actually, how do I know that my intuition is on it versus actually, I'm deluding myself. So I was really curious to explore that with you a bit and just, how do you find your own rightness within yourself as a leader? I think that's the question I'm asking you.
It's a big one and something that, I've been thinking about a lot. And it's actually also one of my edges. You see, what I find is I actually find that thinking that I might be right as something that's a bit dangerous. Because this is where, as you said, the delusion is popping its head. I actually, as a recovering agilist, although possibly a true agilist at heart, whatever you would say, however you would think it is, it's all about the riskiest assumption to test. And I think what I find is I've lived most of my life possibly getting used to thinking I'm right in many aspects. And the journey of leading a business, not being employed and being a leader, but actually leading a business and now also being a freelancer, solo entrepreneur, whatever you will call our wonderful state, has taught me that I'm often not. Often that, being stubborn, pursuing this passionate belief that I hold has not brought me success. Dare I say the opposite. So now my answer is, how do I know I'm right? Well, I'm probably wrong, but there might be a grain of truth. And, if I can make an assumption, I can make a bet, a punt. The big question there, and this is the question I'm transforming this question to, is what's the biggest assumption I'm not sure about and how do I test it? So that's what I do. What about yourself, Vanessa?
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? I'm not sure that I'm not sure that I think about things as assumptions.
Mm.
And I'm loving what you're sharing about, being in the world of agile and how everything is on testing assumptions. And I'm wondering if maybe I've had more of a fixed mindset about things, which is, that there are possibilities or there are variables here. And I think I might kind of weigh up the data and what I think is the right way to go, and then just back myself intuitively. But I think in that I can find myself maybe not being very flexible, not being open to what's emerging sometimes, and then being really attached to it. So I kind of really like what you're saying about, everything's an assumption. We're assuming all of the time, but then we're just testing things out because it kind of loosens up. Maybe the ego is the right word. I don't know. Do you know what?
No. I think absolutely ego plays a part into it, right? Because we like to confirm that we're right. Our ego loves to see that we're valuable and our ideas work, leadership circle model, and especially like the protective part. The middle bit is all about that. But there's a challenge with, to be honest, Rebecca, sorry, to be honest, Vanessa, sorry, why do I think Rebecca? To be honest, it's all about, I just spoke to Rebecca, it's all about a theoretical aspect that everything is an assumption, but there's something that we need to think about as leaders. Because you see, the problem, Vanessa, is that if you want to champion an idea, or you want to sell a product or your services, what people are looking for is your confidence that you really believe in what you're selling, or people in your team that you really believe that this is the right way to go, or if you're a senior leader, that's the vision they can stand behind. And if all you have is assumptions, you might not be as inspiring or, convincing as people are used to. Now, this duality is something I'm not saying struggling with, but definitely it takes some effort from me now.
Mm.
Mm.
Well, and I think the thing for me is very much around how. So what I'm hearing is there's a self-belief, but what feeds your self-belief? What where do you get that? And I mean, in my head, it's an intuitive hit that says, instinctively, this feels the direction of travel.
I get it. And to be honest, I fully appreciate that. And this is how, a lot of the time I've worked, right? So the universe has presented it. This is like a thing that's happening. I really feel like this is something we need to go for. But the big question, Vanessa, then is like, what if the reality doesn't validate our gut feel? That's the most painful thing, isn't it?
Yeah. And so my thing that I'm learning about that is am I actually looking at the reality, or am I feeling something within myself that I'm then projecting out into the, so it's like,
Oh, of course. It's perfectly natural, isn't it, that we get the data we have and it's being filtered through our own perception. Like, I'm sure we can talk about the stories of our leaders. I've, had so many people that, for instance, I've spoke to someone just before our chat just now, and they said, what if someone is like permanently disengaged? How do you know that that's the case? Like, is it like, have you got proof? And I'm not saying these words, but as a coach, it's interesting exploring what got you there to this thinking, right? But it's perfectly reasonable that we're taking on data and tinting it
Yeah.
with how we feel about it.
Right. And even that permanently disengaged, I'm like, what does that mean?
What does that mean?
Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Because what I might think of that and someone else might think of that. I mean, like there's a fixed state to that, isn't it? The permanent. Yeah.
And this is where you hear something like this, right? When someone says something from a perspective of, and that's interesting, right? So when you hear someone saying something from a perspective of, I am very confident that that's the case, right? You can hear it. You can see it in the way someone says this. Like, for instance, myself, I remember back in December, I spoke to someone about my strategy and I said, well, I'm only going to do inbound marketing. And I said it with such an aggression because even, if this makes sense, people will queue in and buy it. And then I thought, just looking into the eyes of the person on the call, I said, how stupid is that, right? Whenever I have this tone of I'm confident that something is going to happen, or I'm confident, this is how I know that I'm probably wrong.
Yeah.
This is how I know, right?
And when you know that you're probably wrong, what happens next?
Well, I can tell you what happens. Pain. I mean, that's only one word to describe it, where you have to drag yourself out, by pulling your own hair and pulling yourself out of this rut. I was like, and talk to yourself internally and reflect. Look, I understand. There's reasons why you think so. I know it sounds funny, but that's the dialogue I have with myself. I journal and I said, look, okay, fine. Internally, I can see something's going on here. So let's explore. Let's internally reflect. I know, like Socratic dialogue internally. I'm just doing it here on the podcast, but that's what I do. I have to acknowledge the fact that it hurts, but sometimes, you need to put on the stitches. So that's what I do. But the question is, how do you deal with that, Vanessa? Because I'm sure these situations happen too.
Yeah, and I'm not okay. So I would say that I'm a work in progress, as we all are in this. And I think, so I think most of my decision making is if I allow it to be intuitive, instinctive. But I have been, or I was really trained out of that through some of the places that I've worked, the qualifications that I've done that have required this evidence-based rigor.
Yeah.
So I can be really conflicted between those two aspects of me. And what I've noticed is that at my edge, so if I can't see the outcome that I'm, it's not yet manifested, I feel anxious. And when I feel anxious, one of the things that I can do in my self-appraisal is overly criticize myself. Or I can, have that thing of fear of failure or, imposter syndrome can come up. And I think, as you rightly say, I'm not a consistent journaler. But I'm learning that journaling really helps for me to see and identify the patterns that I have. And what I realize is that there is a bias in my self-appraisal a lot of the time, which doesn't tend to be like, you could be overly optimistic and overly positive, like, and be completely blind. That doesn't tend to be my bias. It tends to be the other way, on the negative bias, where I'm more likely to kind of go, okay, you're sure, and find the critical aspects of what I've done. So what I'm really working on in my practice is how can I hold tension and not kind of kind of undermine myself. And I mean, if you think about in a coaching conversation, because I'm conscious that people listening to this might think, what's she on about holding tension? But we might ask a question to someone and then there's a kind of complete silence.
Yeah.
Or someone might really feel uncomfortable with that and then they come back with a defensive response. And the more I took that the path of the MCC path, the more I understood that really having people do their own work and really hold that tension was really important. And for me, the challenge is holding my own tension, like sitting with it, recognizing it's there, noticing whether I'm trying to make myself right or wrong. And then just kind of go, okay, what does the data say? And what actually, is the next step? What's the one step forward, the most immediate step?
The one that can actually, and I think, you wrote a post about it, I think, recently on the wonderful social platform of LinkedIn. And I found that inspiring too, in terms of like this, thinking about the next step brings some solace, because as you were speaking and you talked about, what comes to you when you're having doubt, I don't think, I'm just having thinking that maybe the words that you thought aren't necessarily the words that you might have said, right? There's something difficult that our imposter syndrome is telling us when that happens.
Right.
And what helps me is I freaking write it out, right? Okay, well, let's write it out in the journal. It's like, fine, okay, you're saying this and that, and this is probably the worst words that you don't want to hear are really coming to your mind. The thing that you're most afraid of, the thing that is the edge, the thing that the imposter says is this secret thing, this secret soft underbelly that it's exposing. Just write it out. Okay, well, it's there, right? It no longer has any hold on me. It's on paper or on my tablet if I write with my Apple Pencil, and it's obviously easier if you have a coach that can guide you through it. But if you don't, even a piece of paper can be a relief when you see that, right? Because when it's there, when it's written like that, it just maybe dissipates. There's a bit of less of a strength than when it's the imposter saying that.
Yeah, I noticed. I really want to share an example with you that is that happened this morning, and it's a very. So if we think of leadership as we're all leaders in our own lives, right? So we're not talking about the positional title here. There is. So I live in a community, and because I have a dog, you tend to see people on your dog walk and have conversations. And there is a gentleman here who about 2 years ago had a stroke, and he has a little dog, and a couple of times I have taken him to a different area to walk, and we've walked. And anyway, the other day he said to me, we came back from a walk, and I challenge him in the walk because I like to walk at pace and hills and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's challenge. So when he finishes, he's like, I've worked really hard. Anyway, he WhatsApped me, and he'd been watching this program on the iPlayer, which was called The Pilgrimage. And it's about people that walk, like celebrities are walking part of, I think it's the North Downs Way.
Okay, yeah. Beautiful.
And they're obviously having this incredible experience, it's really spiritual experience. Anyway, so he WhatsApped me and he said, oh my God, you've got to watch this. I feel really tearful watching it. Bearing in mind, this is like a 70-year-old guy. And he said to me, I really want to set myself a goal in the summer to, be at that point where I could just walk parts of it with my dog. And so I'm like, great. Okay. So what's the first step? And, really encouraging. We have a gym here and there's a trainer that is brilliant. I think would be brilliant for him. And I'm saying, do that. Anyway, this morning he is
Yeah.
with some another lady that walks with him quite regularly, and she decided to, he was saying, I'm really looking forward to it. I'm taking my first yoga, lesson on Friday. And she turns to me and him and she says, Vanessa, he needs to be careful. Vanessa, like she's kind of telling me off, kind of,
Mm-hmm.
he's had a stroke. He needs
Yeah.
to, so if I don't make her wrong, I'm like, yeah, I get that. But he's not talking about just suddenly going off and doing the full thing now. He's talking about a training plan, and I get what she's saying. But the impact of it I found it really hard. I mean, in the end, I walked the other way. But,
Mm-hmm.
just that, the reason I'm sharing that story is because sometimes I think we can have this sense of rightness within ourselves, like, oh, this is the
Mm.
way.
You need that, yeah.
And then someone around us or the people around us question it. And it's almost like they trigger those doubts in yourself that are like, should I be doing this? Is this okay? Whatever. And one of the things that I said to her was that I have a friend, and weirdly enough, I've just done a little video about this, but I have a friend that said to me once, Vanessa, there's a book with dates in it. And when no one knows when your name is next to a particular date, but when it is, that's when your number's up. And you don't know it, and I don't know it. So you might as well live your life. And I really love that attitude, right? Because it's like, how often are we not really leading our lives and living our lives in a way that is, embracing risk and courage and fulfilling? We're leading kind of safe lives, worrying about things too much, over cautious. And so for me, there's that piece in this question about, how do you know you're right? Particularly if sometimes you're finding yourself swimming in water that is risk averse and affirming back to you, some of
Mm-hmm.
your secret fears.
Oh man, yeah. I know. Well, you could say that find yourself the environment that supports the way you want to live your life. We
Right.
become the people and surround ourselves with people that have the lives we want to lead. Um, it's maybe why we're talking on this podcast, whatever it might mean. But essentially, this is the big support because, as you said, you've used the word a community, and in fact, I think that's just so important because we've evolved to look at our tribe and see what's happening there and have a bias based on how this particular tribe behaves, whether it's more adventurous or not, whatever behaviors are acceptable. It also obviously relates to organizations that can control that. So I think this is like very classic wisdom, which is to surround yourself with people that possibly lead the life you want to have. Now, the interesting thing here is, sadly, nowadays, for many people, their sense of belonging is being fulfilled by means of social media.
Yeah.
And it unfortunately is slightly bending their perception. And you yourself said you're publishing a video. I'm heavy on content too. Even this conversation is a part of it. But thankfully, like in this conversation, maybe, dear listener, if you're surrounding yourself with people like ourselves, with people that have conversations like this, that are not afraid to admit how challenging things are, that are not afraid to admit that leadership is hard and it requires vulnerability, it might benefit you, right? And that's whatever it is, Vanessa. I think it's all about being in the right place, and also it's like even if you're in the other space, and I've had that, it's like I always say to myself, who am I to know how people should live their lives? I barely know how to live mine.
Yeah, I mean, and I noticed I'm really curious. So, like, are you surrounding yourself in your tribe, and how are you consciously doing that? Like, are you practicing what you've just described?
Mm, the answer is unfortunately negative. I wish I had the. That's the thing, Vanessa. To be honest, and I'm not afraid in sharing that. Well, at least you and I are having a conversation, so there's some side being surrounded. But I think I am unfortunately struggling with that because you see, I guess the people that are living the life you want to lead are probably people you admire, and
Yeah.
the fear of being rejected by said people is a difficult one. You can be rejected by, clients, leads on LinkedIn. People may not like your post, by to be rejected by someone you really admire says something about you. And I know you, I probably wouldn't be. And it's on my list for the year. And then again, we're halfway through January, and finding a mentor that has a name has not yet materialized due to that. So, it's I'd love to practice what I preach, but at least I'm being honest and vulnerable and sincere about not doing so. And as you said, Vanessa, we're all work in progress.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing is there's an opportunity emerging that that you're noticing there's a gap, and therefore that gives you, it puts on your radar that you're looking for mentorship, and that person that fits that bill that you think, oh, you've got something that I'm really curious about and wanting in for myself. And I think we all need that, don't we? It also brings up the fact for me that sometimes, we get to the point where that those that are in our tribe are no longer really the right fit, and that's brings up those whole issues of boundaries and lots of other things.
It does. As someone that has parted ways with a business recently, and thankfully as friends, I know quite well how difficult it can be to be stuck in something that is not working out well. And sadly, and I've been talking about it like over the festive break with my family. I've talked with my father, and he said, well, to have someone like this is a treasure. And I said, well, yeah, but we need it. We need someone that, for instance, can challenge you. We need someone that, and this is like maybe going full circle, Vanessa, in terms of this wonderful episode, which is, how do you know you're right? Well, how about asking someone that you can really trust, your mentor, your spiritual guide, someone that, maybe you trust and can give you the advice so you don't have to bear this alone.
Yeah, and I'm hearing, so also you might, so there's two aspects to it. There's the, do I have that internalized sage wise person within me that I trust? And then do I sense check? Do I do I have someone external to me that I can say, hold on a second, just challenge me on some of these assumptions here, or help me see what I can't see. But I kind of feel like only having external mentorship without that really building up that muscle inside of what through what you've applied through your lived experience. There's that part of me that feels like it that needs to be in balance so that you don't give all your power away to an external mentor.
And that's one of these things, right? Like you said, like optimism and pessimism, being maybe stubborn and stuck in your ways versus doubting yourself, and the imposter syndrome, especially in the leadership position. It feels to me like this is like the edge triangle where the balance is, even if it's attainable, it's so easy to fall off the wagon and fall into one of the sides. It's the position of balance is the hardest one to attain in these situations, sadly.
Yeah. Well, I think it's balance is dynamic, isn't it? It's never static.
Well, it is. Yeah, it also shifts, right? And it's so much going on. We live our lives with some big pace in the modern world. Although happy for you, Vanessa, that it's a quiet January. But even it being quiet, as you said yourself, right? It is an edge, right?
Like, so even I could drive myself nuts in the quiet. Like I'm a
there you go,
fire.
Right?
I'm like a go. It's like, what? Where do I go?
And there's a choice that each of us has, and sadly we've already made this choice of being self-conscious and being people that work on our internal sages, being work in progress, working in this field. So I guess the path of ignorance is no longer available to us, Vanessa. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know, but
But
sometimes
don't
don't you
choose it
just,
if you are a listener. Yeah.
sometimes don't you, like this is just okay, I'm not going to admit this to anybody else, but I do have this secret thought sometimes, like, wouldn't it be great to be completely unaware and just blissfully ignorant? Like it's just like, because sometimes awareness is a bitch. It's like, oh, and now I've got to do something with that awareness. So kind of,
It's barely any time that it isn't, right? It gives you the ability to decide, but I totally agree with you. And I think it's a secret dream of great many people, probably also listeners of ours,
yeah.
including myself.
Well, and I'm thinking, talking of people listening to this, what would we suggest? Like, we've kind of talked around this whole subject about how do you know if I'm right? And I'm wondering if we were to pragmatically bring that down. We've talked about some really key things really that are helpful. You know, seeking feedback from, if it's a mentor or trusted people, what assumption, asking what assumptions, checking the questions, using data to sense check, not just emotion. You talked about journaling. I'm wondering what else, or how can this be useful for someone listening rather than us just kind of navel gazing a little bit?
Well, so personally, if there's a TK tip, it's like if you made a decision or you're making a decision, if you're pursuing a certain cause, like very practically, sit down, turn all the distractions off, and write what you believe is true that makes you make this decision. These are assumptions. Look at them. Maybe give it to others so they can look at them. See if they're really true. Doesn't hurt, I guess. Well, it probably will hurt if you find that they aren't true, but it's for the better. So that's my TK advice. Vanessa, what would you recommend?
Yeah, I think, and I often notice this in our conversations, right? I notice sometimes the similarities and also the differences between us. But, you talk about yourself being stubborn, and I would say I'm probably more doubting, in moments of edge. And I think, so if I took that lens, I would say to somebody, if you're wobbling, like you're taking a big step and a risk, and you're wobbling and you're questioning, am I, am I sure? Maybe I'm too much, whatever. To actually reverse engineer, almost to ask the opposite question, like, where do I know that I'm golden? Do you know what I mean? Where do I know that I'm brilliant? Because if the habit is to go to that negative bias, I just think flip it, and create a new way. So, I mean, a really silly example. I've been quite unproductive this morning, or it has felt quite unproductive because I've done some really nice things. And, I feel like I should, notice the language, I should be working, I should be doing something productive. So I wrote on my list really quickly all the things that I need to do. And amazingly, what surprised me was within 30 minutes, I'd done all of them. I'm thinking, okay, so something's missing here, because I should be working 9 hours, whatever. And then actually just reminding myself, who says? Like, where's this rule coming from? And actually, if I've delivered on that thing, that those things that I need to deliver on, and I've been productive, I've done something creative, that's good enough here, right? Good job. And so
it's important to acknowledge it, yeah.
Yeah. And I think I notice sometimes I can have this hangover from being employed, like of presenteeism with myself, which is crazy when you're self-employed, because the whole point of being self-employed is that you can work with your rhythms and everything else. You get to set it up. And yet sometimes I can be that boss, that is just like, hang on a second, I didn't tell you could take a lunch break.
Oh, come on, Vanessa. It brings us safety. No. Let's embrace it because it brings us safety, right? Even in this position of either leadership or entrepreneurship. Going back to the moment of having your salary being paid every month does bring a warm, fuzzy
Oh
feeling
God,
that we all
it makes your back
crave.
relax, doesn't it? It's like, oh, okay.
Why don't
And
I relax this? But okay, fine.
but isn't it crazy, right? Because we all know that that can change in a moment. Like actually, what really is safety?
Come on, Vanessa. Why would? Okay, I understand it's crazy and so on, but we're human. I don't like to use this word in relation to our basic human instincts. As humans, we're all wacky and crazy. Of course, we are. But I just want to accept ourselves for who we are, for craving safety and having the courage to be leaders or leaders in a role of entrepreneurship, and that's big. Isn't it? Putting yourself out there.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's just like, okay, great. It like finding yourself right in the pursuance of the thing that we're doing. Finding the joy in the doing of it, in the thinking of it, in the creating of it, I think is the lesson that I learn from this conversation. Particularly, it's like, yeah, okay, who knows what the outcome's going to be, whether it's whether it's going to take you towards success of whatever that means to you or not. But actually, the whole point is the aliveness that you have through this journey that you don't have in the same way when you are employed.
Yes. And, I love that you're bringing in joy, but let's talk to the wonderful employed leaders amongst ourselves. Because it's not, not everyone's the crazy ones like myself and Vanessa. Some of you are leaders and you have to pay a mortgage. And this kind of life might not be something that you would enjoy. But you took a mantle of leadership by deciding to lead, whether there are any people following you or not. And this itself is creating your own life. And this itself definitely warrants praise for what you're doing.
Yeah. There's no right way, right? Only the way that's right
Never
for
is.
you.
Well, there you go, right? If we actually know what's right and what's wrong, which it's the
It
whole
turns us
purpose of this
full circle
conversation.
back
It
to,
does. It
yeah, it's
absolutely
like
does.
it's a knowing, it's an internal, felt, visceral knowing. It's an
There you go.
intuitive knowing. So I think maybe that I've been a bit sneaky with this conversation in that, maybe that's what I was I was wanting to take us full circle on and just,
There you go.
Yeah.
But what's important, I think, is our listeners. It's not only us; it's the people that probably are going through these circles themselves. And I hope that the tips and our own perspectives have provided you some space to think, but maybe also some space to reflect and take action.
Yeah. And I think that's a really lovely place for us to complete and thank everybody for listening.
So thank you. And as always, we're publishing every other week our wonderful conversation, Leadership Within. Like and subscribe. Leave us a review and tell your friends. Bye-bye.
Bye.